It is 3 a.m., the house is silent, except for one sound. A baby's desperate cry cuts through the darkness while exhausted parents pace the room with tired eyes. The smart bassinet rocks automatically. Parenting apps promise better sleep. Shelves overflow with expert advice. Yet nothing seems to work. But here's the surprising question. What if the real problem isn't your baby or your parenting? What if modern life itself has broken the system that humans evolved for over 300,000 years? Because our ancestors never raised children alone. And that forgotten truth may change everything. To understand why modern parenting feels so overwhelming, we have to travel back hundreds of thousands of years. Imagine a newborn in the African savannah. There are no walls, no locked doors, no baby monitors. Only darkness, predators, and an infant completely incapable of surviving alone. Human babies are born unusually helpless. Anthropologists believe this is the price our species paid for evolving larger brains while walking upright. If pregnancy lasted much longer, a baby's head would simply be too large to pass safely through the mother's pelvis. As a result, human infants enter the world neurologically unfinished, dependent on constant protection long after birth. Now think about what a newborn actually experiences. For 9 months, every second is filled with warmth, movement, the rhythmic beating of a mother's heart, and the muffled sounds of her voice. Suddenly, that familiar universe disappears. When a modern baby is placed alone in a quiet nursery, its ancient brain doesn't recognize a comfortable bedroom. It recognizes abandonment. To us, it's bedtime. To a brain shaped by 300,000 years of evolution, isolation means danger. That piercing cry echoing through your home isn't manipulation. It isn't stubbornness. It is an emergency survival signal that once determined whether a child would live long enough to see another sunrise. And the story becomes even more remarkable when scientists compared today's babies with children still living much closer to humanity's ancestral way of life. In the late 1970s, anthropologist Melvin Konner lived among the Aakung San people of the Kalahari Desert, one of the few societies whose lifestyle still resembles that of our distant ancestors. What he witnessed challenged decades of conventional parenting advice. The babies cried remarkably little. Not because they were naturally calmer, not because they had easier temperaments, but because their environment answered their needs before those needs became desperate. A Kung infant spends nearly the entire day against someone's body. Mothers carry their babies while gathering food, talking, laughing, and walking for miles. At the first tiny whimper, often before a full cry even begins, the baby is picked up, comforted, or breastfed. Nursing happens frequently, sometimes 4 times an hour, long before hunger escalates into distress. Modern research has reached a strikingly similar conclusion. In one Canadian study, mothers were simply asked to carry their babies for several extra hours each day, even when the infants were calm. The result? Crying dropped dramatically, especially during the notorious 6-week peak when many parents feel they are reaching their breaking point. Perhaps ancient babies weren't somehow easier. Perhaps they were simply living in the environment evolution had prepared them for. But carrying a baby was never the responsibility of just one exhausted parent. And that missing piece may explain why modern families struggle so profoundly. But there is another discovery that may be even more important. Ancient parents didn't simply carry their babies more. They almost never carried them alone. For nearly 99% of human history, raising a child was a shared responsibility. Anthropologists call this alloparenting, the practice of grandparents, aunts, older siblings, cousins, and neighbors all helping care for the youngest members of the community. Among the Ife people of Central Africa, researchers observed newborns being passed between multiple trusted caregivers every single hour. A tired mother could rest while another pair of loving arms stepped in. A grandmother soothed the baby. An older sister entertained them. Someone was always nearby. Now compare that with modern life. A single parent sits alone in a small apartment, juggling diapers, bottles, laundry, work emails, and endless advice from strangers online. Society tells them this is normal, that they should be able to do it all. From an evolutionary perspective, it is anything but normal. The modern nuclear family is astonishingly new. For most of our species' existence, no mother was expected to spend 12 exhausting hours alone with an infant. Maybe that explains why so many parents today feel overwhelmed. not because they are failing, but because they are attempting a task that evolution designed an entire village to accomplish. And nowhere does that mismatch become more obvious than during the longest hours of the night. One question haunts parents around the world. Is your baby sleeping through the night yet? It sounds like a milestone every child should reach, but according to evolutionary scientists, that expectation may be based more on modern culture than on human biology. For decades, Professor James McKenna and his team studied sleeping mothers and infants in a laboratory. What they discovered was extraordinary. When a breastfeeding mother and her baby sleep close together under safe conditions, their bodies begin to synchronize. Their breathing rhythms align. Their heartbeats subtly influence one another. Even their sleep cycles become remarkably coordinated. Instead of falling into long, uninterrupted sleep, babies naturally wake for brief moments, nurse, and drift back to sleep again. Often, neither mother nor child fully awakens. The entire exchange can last less than 2 minutes before both return to rest. Now imagine trying to survive a prehistoric night alone. Darkness concealed predators. Temperatures dropped. Every unfamiliar sound could mean danger. For a helpless infant, waking up alone wasn't inconvenient. It was terrifying. Seen through that ancient lens, a baby calling for its parents at midnight suddenly makes perfect sense. Perhaps the real mystery isn't why babies wake so often. Perhaps it's why modern society ever expected them not to. And yet, when comfort, experience, and even love seemed powerless, our ancestors reached for something even more fascinating. Even in the closest-knit communities, there were nights when nothing worked. The baby had been fed, held, rocked, carried for hours, yet the crying continued. For ancient parents, this wasn't just exhausting. It was terrifying. Infant mortality was painfully common, and without modern medicine, no one could explain why a healthy-looking child might suddenly become ill or never wake again. So when experience reached its limits, they turned to something else. Across Mesopotamia 4,000 years ago, priests recorded magical lullabies on clay tablets. Mothers whispered sacred words, believing unseen spirits were disturbing their children. In ancient Egypt, protective songs were sung over sleeping infants while tiny amulets hung around their necks. Some spells even invoked everyday ingredients, onions, lettuce, honey, as symbolic weapons against invisible forces threatening the child. Did these rituals cure disease? Probably not. But they healed something equally important. They calmed frightened parents. They transformed helplessness into action and despair into hope. A mother singing softly in the darkness may not have frightened away evil spirits, but her steady voice, gentle rhythm, and loving touch almost certainly soothed the nervous system of the baby in her arms. Thousands of years later, science offers better explanations. Yet the greatest lesson from those ancient lullabies remains surprisingly timeless. The next time you're awake at 3 a.m. with a crying baby, remember this. Parents have faced this moment for over 300,000 years. What has changed isn't the baby, it's the world around us. Human beings evolved to raise children with an entire village, not in isolation. So if parenting feels overwhelming, it doesn't mean you're failing. It may simply mean you're doing alone what evolution never intended one person to do. If this story gave you a new perspective, share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, and join us for the next documentary exploring the hidden history of humanity.